Good day, everyone. Welcome to another Security Boulevard DevOps.com webinar. Today's webinar is Mobile Threats and Trends Changing Mobile App Security, and it's sponsored by our good friends at OneSpan. I think if you're interested in the mobile threats and what's happening in mobile security, this will be a great webinar for you to really dig in and learn something. Before we get started, though, just want to go over with everyone ground rules here. We find in doing webinars, what makes for a great webinar is interactivity with our audience. And so we've set aside time for questions. We'll also be doing some polling questions, asking the audience to participate. And I have to ask, please to participate in these questions as the results are only as good as your voting, which pretty much goes for a lot of other things outside of webinars. So please, participate in the polling. If you have questions, you'll see in your GoToWebinar control panel section more questions. If you hit the little arrow, or caret, so it's downward facing, it'll pop open, and you can type your questions in there in real time. My advice to you is don't wait till the end of the webinar to start asking or typing in your questions, as at that point there's usually a rush and we only have a limited amount of time for questions, and there's no guarantee it'll get answered on here. Though if you type it in, we do have a record of it and we can get it out, get a written answer over to you later. But don't do that. Type your questions in as they come into your head. You don't have to worry about forgetting them. They're in there and we have them. I see someone's already asked, is it possible we can get the PowerPoint or the deck? Yes, this webinar is being recorded, and yes, the slides and the recording video will be available on DevOps.com, usually within 24 hours or so, sometimes within 2 hours, or on Security Boulevard, as the case may be here, within that time. So is being recorded, slides and video will be available. Okay, with that question out of the way, though, let's turn back to what I think is going to be a great webinar today. As I mentioned, it's sponsored by our friends at OneSpan, and the webinar is Mobile Threats and Trends Changing Mobile App Security. Let me introduce you to our panel today. If we can go to the next slide, please. Hello. Yep. Well, I'll introduce you to our panelists anyway. Our two panelists today are Samuel Bacon, a product marketing manager for OneSpan, and Will Asala, Director Security Solutions and Security Evangelist on OneSpan. Will, are you there?
Yes, I am, but I think we're starting with Sam.
I got a little nervous there. Sam, how about you? Do you hear me?
Yes, sir. I'm on the line.
All right. So our sound checks are complete. Sam, I'm going to turn things over to you now, and I'll pop in here for polling questions and back later for questions. But it's your show, Sam. Take it away.
Yeah, great. So actually, we do have one poll that we want to start the whole presentation with. So maybe we could get that one live.
Sure.
And part of the reason for that is we want to kind of understand our audience, who's here, and what are their perspectives so far on mobile app security. So it's pretty simple. We just want to find out if people are developers, if they're part of the security team, if they are product managers, product owners, or kind of from the business side. Yeah, so we'll probably just give a little bit of time to get people to answer that. And in case you have anything to add there.
Yeah, no, Sam, that's great. Hopefully everyone fits into one of those buckets. We don't have a other. So put your in there. And as I mentioned earlier, guys, these polls really help the panelists understand the level of and fit the presentation to the audience, but they're only as good as your participation. So please, answer the polling question if you don't mind. And it looks like we've got, over 71% vote. We'll close polling off in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, polling closed. Let's see the answers, Ben. Actually, I'll share them. So survey shows developers 17%, security, which I guess is expected 36%, a little over a third. Almost half of the people, though, are from the product and business side of the house.
Yeah,
Sam,
very,
sense to
yeah,
you?
very interesting there. I'm glad to see some developers on the line. We find that, more and more developers need more and more security education as we all kind of fight this battle against mobile threats together. Yeah, the security audience isn't surprising to see, and it's good to see that some on the product and business side really do take security seriously. And, I think we've got content in this presentation for really everybody there. Will, did you have anything to say about the poll, or?
No, it's great to see so many product people turned out. I think that that's a big kind of a big boost for everybody to see, especially considering security should be taken seriously for all. So it's very good.
Yeah,
Security
great.
is everyone's responsibility, guys. All right, let's get back to our presentation.
Yeah, moving on. Now just to remind ourselves where we're at here, we're going to get started discussing mobile threats and trends, how they're changing mobile app security, with an emphasis on how to really protect an app's runtime on mobile devices, which are by their very nature untrusted environments. So I'm going to jump right into our first trend here. Here you see, well, first of all, let me preface this with there are a number of reports that have kind of come out in the past couple months that track mobile threats in the first half of the year. And while this is a statistic from just one of those reports, overall we're seeing that mobile threats themselves, that is, threats to mobile apps specifically, really are on the uptick. There is an increase, not only in just the second quarter, but kind of overall. So here you see a timeline of fraudulent transaction data from an RSA report, and that spans the second quarter of 2015 through to the second quarter of 2018. And it's broken up by channel here, and the channels included our web, mobile browser, and mobile app. And really the key thing here that caught my attention is you see a slow and steady increase of fraud that occurs over the mobile channels, and then takes us to 71% of fraud for the second quarter of 2018. 40% of fraud transactions came through mobile apps and 31% through mobile browsers, according to this data. So without a doubt, the first trend here is just mobile fraud is real, and it is absolutely on the rise. Now, speaking of mobile app fraud specifically, that mobile app channel, I want to home in on one type in particular, and that is rogue mobile apps. So this is another sort of segment of data from that report mentioned in the first slide. And the report itself defines a rogue mobile app as one that uses an organization's brand without permission, which can involve a number of seedy techniques, including repackaging attacks, whereby an attacker downloads an official app from the App Store, analyzes that app to understand its inner workings, then adds malicious code into the app, and distributes that tampered app to unsuspecting users. Late last year and earlier this year, as cryptocurrency prices really ballooned, in general, the community found that repackaging apps with cryptocurrency miners really came into fashion with attackers in order to hijack mobile computing power to mine cryptocurrency. I guess my point here, though, is that threat is really getting increasingly serious and can include mobile banking Trojans masquerading as seemingly benign apps or fake versions of games, for example. So this report attributed 28% of the fraud to mobile apps specifically, and that's a 13% increase over the first quarter of 2018. So again, we're really seeing signals here that these sort of attacks are on the rise. And the other point I want to make is that developers need to not only protect their own apps against this sort of attack, this sort of misuse of the brand, this reverse engineering and repackaging, but they also need to protect their apps from other apps to which that occurs, right? So if a repackaged app is downloaded to a user's device, it's quite possible that there might be malicious functionality in there that targets, for example, a mobile banking app, and perhaps that's your mobile banking app that you're developing. again, it speaks to the untrusted nature of these environments to which we're deploying these mobile apps. And we'll talk more about this as we move on through the presentation. Oops, I skipped ahead, forgive me there. Okay, another on the malware topic specifically, Kaspersky Lab detected in Q2 2018 more than 1.7 million malicious installation packages on mobile devices. Now, getting a little bit more specific, Kaspersky also identified an all-time high number of banking Trojan installation packages, mobile banking, specifically in the wild in the second quarter of 2018. So when a banking app is launched, a Trojan will display its own interface over the banking app to steal a user's login credentials. And to the user, that malicious interface is nearly indistinguishable from the real thing. And some of these Trojans also include SMS hijacking functionality, whereby authentication codes that are sent over SMS can actually be intercepted. He will be talking about overlay attacks a bit more in depth in just a few slides here. Now, number 4 trend here. As I mentioned, a whole lot of these mobile banking Trojans find their way onto users' devices by way of apps downloaded from sources other than the official app marketplaces. So on that topic, a new distribution model that's been kind of championed by Epic Games, which is the publisher of the Fortnite game, could potentially make things worse. And here's why. Some of you on the call might know that a pretty general sort of standard piece of mobile security advice or hygiene is to just make sure you're not downloading apps from sources other than the official app stores. And there's a number of reasons for that. And so Fortnite, in order to circumvent some of the fees that Google charges for publishing the apps and facilitating the download and that sort of thing, they decided to distribute themselves outside of the Google Play Store. So to download Fortnite for Android, you won't find it on the Google Play Store. To download it, you actually have to circumvent a key safeguard instituted by Google, whereby a user has to explicitly allow for the download of apps from sources other than the Google Play Store. You can see kind of the example of that in that screenshot from the app at the right. Essentially, users are sort of being asked to compromise the security of their device when they have to make these changes to these very basic security controls to protect themselves. So again, my question here is, 15 million people downloaded this app in 21 days after beta. And how many of them remember to actually go back and deactivate that permission after downloading the game, right? Google, and they have an annual sort of Android security report that they publish, and they actually found that devices that are downloading apps from unknown sources are 9 times more likely to download malware. And again, this doesn't only put users in general at risk, it also puts other apps on these users' devices at risk, which is why it's important to be protecting app runtime, because that runtime of your app could very well be targeted by other apps on the device itself. And sort of just, I don't know if this is icing on the cake or just kind of ironic potentially, but an earlier version of Fortnite for Android actually included a man-in-the-disk vulnerability. I'll tell you what that means in just a second. But what's interesting is because Epic Games kind of sidestepped the Google Play process, they actually, their app didn't undergo this kind of automated security testing that Google usually does before it publishes an app to the Google Play Store. Now, that testing, of course, doesn't catch everything, and we know that because we know that bad apps are actually making it onto the stores. But in addition, we don't even know that testing would necessarily have identified this attack. You have no idea whether or not this Fortnite app had undergone any security testing prior to it being published. I have to assume that Epic Games has a decent security program so that they are doing some of that, but regardless, they missed this man-in-the-disk attack. And so what the man-in-the-disk vulnerability means is that during the Fortnite installation process, the app used storage outside of its own secured internal storage space so that any app with permission to write to external storage could substitute a malicious APK for the Fortnite APK and essentially install a malicious app with elevated permissions and no user notification. Now, before I move on to the next section, we do have another poll question.
Yes, we do, and I'm going to launch that one. Oh, here, no. Hold on, that was the wrong question. I apologize. I will take the second one. Okay. In terms of mobile app security, what is your most urgent concern at this time? Please select just one. Making security easier, more efficient for the mobile app dev, following best practices for secure mobile app dev, protecting our mobile app against the latest attacks and malware, reducing fraud in the mobile channel, balancing security in the user experience. Tough choices there. You got to kind of read the answers carefully to make up your mind, I assume. But let's get some folks voting. It looks like many of you have. We're going to close voting off, though, in another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Voting is now closed. And our results are, here we are. Sam, Will, what do you think?
Yeah, interesting. You know, I think it makes sense that people are kind of worried about the latest threats and how to protect their apps against that based on kind of the title of this webinar. So that makes a lot of sense to me. I guess I'm a little surprised, and Will, I'm interested to know what you think in general, but also specifically this, that so few people said making security easier or more efficient for developers, because that's something we'll actually get to in a few slides here. Will, any thoughts on the poll?
Yeah, it was an interesting as we were watching the results kind of shake out here. You know, the balance in the security and the user experience. I think that's from my experience, that's always been high, and for a while it was winning there.
Will.
I think in the end there.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. In the end there, I also see, you know, the protecting against the latest malware attack. I think that's an issue for everyone, and the attacks are always changing. And so, you know, today we're showing you some of the latest ones, but you know, the keeping on top of this is a daunting task. And I think we're going to show today, you know, how we can help you stay on top without having to do a lot of heavy lifting there. But yeah, I think I'm with you. That making security easy for the devs, that is a surprising one. I know our devs out there, we are the best and brightest. So I know it's sometimes interesting to get in there when we try to make things easier. But I think the devs out there will really like these solutions.
Guys, let me throw one thing out at you, and I'm interested in your thoughts on it. Knowing that nearly half of our audience here today comes from the product business side of things, right? Wouldn't you think that balancing security with user experience would have been a little bit more popular? Or does it show that product business people really are security conscious, and so they're voting there for the security more than a balancing of security versus, in this case, user experience?
Yeah, I mean that's interesting that you bring that up. You know, I think first of all, more and more we're realizing that sort of security incidents here and there can kind of affect the trust that users or customers might have in your app, right? And so from the business and product side, there is a definite sort of reputation protection item there where you want to make sure that you're doing everything you can to secure your app against certain attacks. And you know, the other item that I just wanted to talk about is, you know, in terms of product and business, they want to differentiate the app, I think. And so getting out there really quickly with new features that differentiate the app is important. But you know, more and more, I think there's an understanding that you know, each new feature itself could potentially add some security risk there. And so you really need a way to efficiently be designing security in, and then also, you know, taking a more proactive approach with protecting apps, allowing, you know, empowering apps to protect themselves on untrusted devices, for example. Will, did you have anything else to add there?
I agree immensely here. I mean, I think the balance of securing the user experience has been first and foremost for our product, for people that we work with in the product world forever now. The fact that we see a little bit higher lean on this protecting against the latest attack, I think that goes to show that we have a little bit of a fear of the known and unknown on what's happening in the mobile world. It's hard to be out there and face all these attacks. So the fact that it's higher than that user experience, that's not surprising. But hopefully we're going to show you how to reduce that and on making more money and getting the security out of the way.
Thanks, Will. With that, thanks everybody for your participation. We've got just one more poll coming towards the end here. So thanks again, and I'm going to move on. So again, we're talking about like why do we suspect some of these mobile threats are on the rise and mobile fraud is on the rise? And what it comes down to is attackers are monitoring mobile adoption. Criminal enterprises are businesses like any other, and with the increase in mobile adoption, attackers recognize the opportunity and are looking for ways to take advantage of that. Now, these are some statistics focused on banking, but banking is sort of this big, ripe, juicy target, and so if more consumers are moving to mobile to execute fund transfers and things of that nature, it's likely that attackers have their eyes on that and are looking to shift with consumers. So again, just to kind of tie it back to some of the mobile banking Trojan threats that I mentioned earlier, Juniper expects that mobile banking usage will actually overtake web banking this year. I've seen some reports stating that actually that has already happened in 2018, but we'll have to see if that's right. Again, what that would mean is that more people are actually transacting with their bank over their mobile app than they are online, for example. And again, as more users adopt mobile banking, more providers are offering mobile financial services. And again, it makes it all the more juicy a target, right? And because those statistics were really focused on banking, it's not just banking. This goes beyond banking. In general, the mobile app market has more than doubled in 2 years' time. This comes from App Annie's annual report. It'll be interesting to see how much that grows again next year. And again, I said it before, but just to reiterate, where there's money, you can bet there are miscreants scheming to get their hands on some of it. So as more people use mobile, as more people use mobile apps, attackers are watching that and they see those as opportunities for them to make some money. So at the same time, competition here is fierce, right? And everyone wants a piece of that pie. More organizations are publishing more apps and updates more quickly than they ever have in the battle for customers. To give you an idea of the velocity, analytics firm 42 Matters reports that there are an average of about 4,700 apps or updates published to Google Play each day, and around 1,200 apps or updates published to the Apple App Store each day. And that average comes from data of the past 3 months on their website. And so you see here at the bottom, and I mentioned this a little bit as we were discussing the actual poll, that the name of the game here is improving or adding more app functionality more quickly than other providers do, right? In order to differentiate yourself. Unfortunately, what that can lead to without taking security into account is security doesn't get the focus it deserves. There's only so much time in the day. And according to a recent survey of developers and IT pros about actually the DevSecOps topic, so very relevant to probably some of our audience here today, just about half of respondents said developers within their organization don't have enough time to spend on security. So with that in mind, again, I'm thinking back to that poll when the answer was that making security easier or more efficient for developers was not one of the sort of top answers. It's interesting to learn that, because I think that developers are overwhelmed in trying to push more features out the door, and as a result, they don't have the time to spend on security itself. So, most developers aren't security experts in the first place. The developers on this call, I applaud you for going out there and trying to learn more about what you can do. And as Will had said, mobile threats are constantly evolving. It's really hard to keep up on all of these latest threats. And so, the question kind of comes down to, is it possible to make mobile app security more effective and efficient? And I'm here to argue that the answer is yes. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But first, I'm actually going to hand it over to Will LaSala to talk a bit more in depth about some of the mobile app attacks that are on the rise. And he's actually going to tell a good story of an actual sort of delivery scheme that he was actually involved in himself. Will, over to you.
Yeah, and I think what we see is, there are a lot of different attack vectors out there, a lot of different things that we're focused on. I think what I want to show, and what I hope to show you guys, are some of those attack vectors that are active today and that are kind of changing the landscape as we move forward. So as we kind of move into our first attack here, and Sam, if you could move to the next slide. The first thing here is to, again, this whole repackaging and distribution of those files. So as we're looking at how you get an application onto your phone, how you get a rogue application out there are a whole bunch of different methodologies out there. I think most of us in North America kind of believe that if we post it on Google Play or we post it on the Apple App Store, then our app won't get repackaged, or they're already protecting those distribution channels. And although that's a great concept to believe in, it's not necessarily true. They're doing a great job of working that angle and trying to protect us from those apps, but there are always malicious apps getting up on those stores, and even the beginning of this year, we saw a large number of apps get pulled just from the Google App Store. Apple doesn't tend to post as much about their security incidents, but they're there, and they happen quite frequently too. On what we see with getting the app onto the device, one common way of doing that is through third-party app stores. And so if you are an Amazon customer or you live outside the United States, you probably don't get your apps from the Google Marketplace or from the Apple App Store. You probably get them from other locations. And those apps may not go through the same security checks. One other way that we saw, and so I know that Sam spoke quite a bit about how Epic Games and the Fortnite installer kind of work through, but that kind of opens up this side loading of applications, and that side loading is basically where you can distribute an application through your desktop onto your phone. And you can do that on both your iOS and your Android devices, and essentially allowing applications from unknown sources. And now that we've opened that channel, and now that that is out in the marketplace and kind of mainstream now, we're starting to see these attacks. And so what we're showing on the screen here is one of the ways that an attack actually comes out the door. So essentially, I'll go to a website. The website might actually pop up and tell me that, hey, my phone has been infected, or my phone has some type of security problem, and then I need to update it. And so as a user, I'll say, yeah, okay, I might get socially engineered into clicking yes. And so in this way, it brings me to what's actually another web page here. And so on the right-hand side, you see this second web page, but it doesn't look like a web page. And to most normal Android people, this actually might look quite familiar. It might look like my actual, my system update or my Play Store update channel. And it's even offering me to update an app that looks very similar to what I already have installed on my machine with the Google Play Store Protect scenario. And basically, it's just a web page, though. And so when I click these buttons, it's going to ask me to load this application, to download this application, and to launch this application. And if I've sideloaded an application before, I'm not going to be prompted with the security alerts. This is going to allow this application to be installed and for it to immediately be put in place. And so this is just one of, and this is just a recent example. I saw this actually 2 weeks ago over the weekend when I was kind of browsing through and managed to grab a couple screenshots of it. But this is something that everybody is kind to starting to run into. Again, this is just one example. There are a whole bunch of other ones here. Once you've downloaded that app and you've installed that application, you run into some of these other attacks. And if we can go to the next slide here. One of the pieces here is kind of an overlay attack. So in this example here, we've taken a couple screenshots of how an overlay attack might actually look. So once you download that app, so there was a very famous version of an overlay attack last year called the Flashlight app. And essentially you download the Flashlight app, and the Flashlight app would hide its icon so you couldn't see it anymore, but it would be running in the background. And essentially, whenever you went to a specific app or an app popped up, what would happen is you'd get a screen overlay. So in our example here, normally when I launch my my demo banking app here on my OneSpan banking app, I'd get this manage your account and scan kind of screen. But when I have installed that malicious app, now I'm getting a completely different screen on there. And this screen here is basically an account verification. If I'm a banking app or if I'm anything that uses user authentication, for a user, this might not seem unusual. You know, we've been asking on the web channel for years for customers to, hey, there's been a compromise, come in, change your password, verify your information. A number of large financial institutions are prompting users to go back and to verify their information. So to an end user on their mobile phone, this is kind of commonplace, and they might not flag this as problematic. But again, it's only happening when a specific app happens, and this screen is getting written right on top of the other screen. So right behind this, if I was able to move this, I'd see this manage your account screen. But this is sitting right on top of it. So if I go and actually look at the open applications, I can see that there's actually two applications running. I can see the Flashlight app running in the background of my banking application here. A second kind of more nefarious attack, as we kind of move into the next slide here, is something called a code injection attack. And a code injection attack is where now we're really starting to get kind of these hackers that don't want to be caught, and they're really deeply embedded into the whole process of communication here. And maybe they're attacking more than just one application. Maybe they're just sitting around waiting for specific applications. And so we saw these attacks with crypto wallets recently, where essentially people were getting their wallet siphoned off. As soon as a user launched their wallet, the contents of the wallet would be removed. We also see these attacks in man in the middle and man in the application style attacks. And essentially what we see here is that again, you've got an app. It's been sitting on the device. Usually, it's been payloaded, which means that you've downloaded your trusted application, and within that trusted application, at some time, it actually downloads secondary applications. And these secondary applications hide themselves and wait and inject themselves into the system of the device. So in this case here, we launched our application. We looked at our transactions, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to wire a new transaction to somebody. And in most situations, what will happen is it'll just use information that is passed back and forth between the back end and the client. Now, what this code injection actually did was it took the information that the user entered, the $100 and the account number that it was going to send the money to, and it modified that information and sent that modified information onto the back end. in situations, that's kind of the end of it. So the bank will then receive that, attempt to make that transaction. Hopefully the bank's back end will catch that, but likely is that it'll just get processed and that money will be gone. So what we see in some newer applications, and what we're here kind of helping them do, is implement some checks and balances on that. And so in our version, to help users identify this attack, we send back a notification to the user. And the notification to the user is encrypted. So it's encrypted all the way from the bank all the way to the mobile device. And then the attacker can't change that information. And so if the attacker can't change that information, that allows the end user to see that information. And of course, what we see here in the fourth section of the slide is that there was $10,000 sent to an account named Bad Guys Are Us. And they're asking us if we want to approve this transaction. Of course, in a social engineering world, we're going to say no, or we're going to try and block that transaction, allow the user to block that transaction. Again, most risk systems should start to catch this, but in the OneSpan world, we offer a total solution that actually goes in and catches all of this and offers this confirmation to protect all of this. And Sam, did you have any other comments or suggestions?
No, I think that's great. Thanks, Will, for that kind of deep dive here. Just to, again, really make it clear, get down to the nitty gritty of how some of these attacks work rather than just simply those statistics at the beginning. So I appreciate it.
I can have a polling question now.
Yes, sir.
I'm launching. What current investments is your organization making in mobile app security? And here I think you can select more than one. Secure code training for developers, very important. SDKs for mobile app security. Mobile app security testing. Everyone should be doing it. Mobile app shielding, runtime protection. Please, as I say, I'm not sure if the polling in webinar, GoToWebinar has the ability to do more than one. Maybe it does.
It looks like these are square check boxes, which makes me think that you can do more than one. But
okay, let's give it a shot. We'll give some people a chance to vote because you're going to pick more than one. But guys, as I said earlier, it makes for the best webinar if you all can jump in a little bit here. We'll close voting though in another 5, 4, 3. Come on, a couple more. 2. All right, voting is now closed. Answers, survey, please. All right, some interesting ones here, guys. What do you think?
Yeah, like you said, I'm glad to see that mobile app security testing is so high up there. That's a key aspect to any sort of developing or mature mobile app security program, without a doubt. I am surprised to see that a third are actually, it might just be that they're interested in investments here in mobile app shielding, but it looks like we have some pretty savvy security and product people here on the line. We're going to talk more about how those SDKs can actually help make mobile security easier for developers themselves. Will, did you have anything to add to the poll at this point?
I think my favorite thing on here is the training. I'm a big proponent of training on here. It's one of those things that I think, both end user training and training for ourselves, continued learning and security is always beneficial. And one of the key components of offering a security solution in general is to maintain that training. So very, very, very interesting.
Will, I knew I liked you. Okay. Sam, take it away.
All right. So like I said, at the beginning here, I want to move on. We asked this poll question because we want to move on to, what we think the baseline should be for the security of a mobile app, and then talk a bit more about how to meet and hopefully actually exceed that baseline. So to start, and Will can attest, we hear from customers and prospects and people that we're talking to at events and things like that, that app developers say they trust the platforms, whether that's Android or iOS or the app stores themselves. And in terms of the continuing evolution and sophistication of these mobile app attacks, it's just not good security strategy to simply depend on Apple or Google to be protecting your app. And here's some of why that is. And I want to be clear that my point here is not to throw Apple or Google under the bus. They're constantly working to improve the security of iOS and Android and their app stores rather. But their work will never be done. As with any software, the operating systems will never be completely free from vulnerabilities, and the official app stores are, not free from malicious apps. And I don't think that they ever will be, because attackers are pretty wily, pretty smart people, and they are definitely motivated to find ways around that. So here's part of the problem, right? Known and unknown vulnerabilities that remain unpatched will put your app and your users at risk, and vulnerabilities are valuable. So, at right, you actually see a pricing chart for 0-day mobile vulnerabilities from the company Zero Diem, and it just goes to show how valuable some of these vulnerabilities actually are. And that just means that it's not only worth the effort for good guys to kind of find these vulnerabilities. Hopefully they're reporting those to Apple and Google so that they can be fixed and users can be protected. But at the same time, bad guys are searching these exact same things out and using a lot of the same tools in many cases. And then finally, miscreants, they continually sidestep app store vetting processes and succeed in getting malicious apps published on Google Play, for example, but also the Apple App Store. Xcode Ghost is kind of the go-to example there. That was a while back, but nonetheless, bad actors are finding ways to get around the App Store vetting. So in addition to these facts, and again, just speaking to the fact that people think that they will be protected simply by depending on the operating systems, the APIs provided by the platforms need to be implemented correctly on the development side, and that's not exactly foolproof. And with that said, I hope I've made it clear here that it's a proper security approach really does require going beyond simply what's provided by the platforms. And so maybe you say, all right, Sam, that's great, but how exactly do we do that? Well, there's not exactly a general standard for mobile app security at this time. Many of you have probably heard of OWASP. OWASP puts out what's called the top 10 mobile risks list. That's something that they'll update every couple of years. And that's just a list of the top 10 items that they think are sort of the most risky in mobile apps. But then actually in the past year or so, they've also introduced a new resource. They have created what's called a mobile app security verification standard in an effort to establish a standard and give people a framework to kind of think about how secure their app needs to be. So the framework is great, it's freely available, and it sets up 4 verification levels of security. They also provide a mobile app security testing guide to help test mobile apps against this verification standard, but we're focusing here just on the standard today. So again, there is a level 1, level 2, and then level 1 and 2 plus R. Level 1 is really for any app that's out there. Level 2 will be for more sensitive apps. And then level 1 or 2 with the addition of R for resiliency signifies some controls that help with anti-tampering and anti-reverse engineering and includes safeguards against that. Across all 7, there are 7 categories in the standard itself. The first level has about 43 total requirements, and the second level has 62 total requirements. Just goes to show you that the level 2, is a sort of step beyond level 1 in terms of the security, without a doubt. And the categories fall into architecture design and threat modeling, data storage and privacy, cryptography, authentication and session management, network communications, platform interaction, and then finally code quality and build setting. And then again, that R level of security includes actually 12 additional requirements. So what I'm suggesting here is that we can start to use a framework such as this one from OWASP to begin making decisions about the proper level of security for any type of mobile app. But deciding which level is right for your app definitely begins with a proper risk assessment, right? It really does depend on your organization and your app. What does your app do? How might those apps or the data they handle be valuable to malicious actors? How hard might it be to compromise your app? And are there motivated adversaries that have the skills to attack your app? And with answers to those sorts of questions, you can actually begin to decide what verification level to apply. And so level 1, for example, is again reasonable for really any mobile app that doesn't qualify for any of the higher levels of security. But then you ask, well, what might require a higher level? Well, when we start talking about an app that's handling personally identifiable information, protected health information or PHI, financial or payments information and the like, additional security perhaps and hopefully obviously is necessary, which then qualifies for level 2. And then, let's think about what types of apps might actually need level 1 security, but also the resiliency or protection against reverse engineering and modification. So here a big one is, cheating is a big problem for mobile games because the user base, the players will grow disillusioned with a game when they start to feel like they don't have a fair shot at competing with other players. So, not all games collect payment or personally identifiable information beyond maybe what's included in the App Store or sort of device ID and that sort of thing, also worthy of protection there. But they probably also want to prevent cheaters from reverse engineering their app or being able to tamper with the game so that they can rack up higher scores or more rewards. So that's a potential possibility for a level 1 plus R verification level there. And then, the highest level of security within the OWASP standard here is level 2 plus R. And this is the right level of security for mobile financial services apps that, as I kind of mentioned earlier, are increasingly under attack. And these apps include funds transfer functionality and allow attackers to conduct fraud, essentially, including interfering with the app's runtime. And in addition to that, L2 plus R can apply to mobile apps that they store data on a device and need to support users on a wide variety of devices using a range of operating systems. As you may or may not know, operating system fragmentation is a big problem, so that there can be large swaths of a user base that don't have the most up-to-date versions of the operating systems, and so are actually that their device alone is exposed, as are apps that are potentially operating on there. And the resilience requirements help include items to make sure that the app can't be taken advantage of in those situations. So I'm going to move on here. Now, again, when we're talking about what makes a mobile app secure and talking about these requirements from OWASP, there's an inside and an outside view. And so first, I just want to kind of talk about the inside view, which is really reducing the amount of vulnerabilities in your code. A good amount of the audience actually probably knows quite a bit about this since you're implementing mobile app security testing today. So again, just like the operating systems, no software will ever be 100% vulnerability free, but following best practices can really help eliminate as many as possible. And some key items here are strong, ideally multi-factor authentication, instituting a mechanism to ensure secure communications between the mobile app and the server itself. Part of that includes validating or verifying the server certificate to ensure the app is talking to the right server. And while in general you should probably just avoid storing data unless it's absolutely necessary, if it is necessary, you need to do that securely, and you also need to institute cryptography above and beyond what's provided by the platform for real true thorough security. Defense in depth is what we're talking about here. So in terms of achieving these, you'll see that a lot of these items are design decisions and secure coding kind of methods. And so I'll talk about this on a future slide, but just want to let you know that OneSpan provides a suite of SDKs to take care of a number of these items, but more on that in just a few. So beyond designing security in and training mobile app developers on secure coding, you need to identify and fix vulnerabilities by subjecting the app to a regular regimen of mobile app security testing. and that should include static and dynamic testing, and then finally some in-depth penetration testing prior to an actual release, if you're able to do that sort of thing. And then kind of what this whole real presentation is leading to here is, even if you're doing all of those things from an internal perspective, there's still a need and a need to protect your app against external threats. Because again, you're deploying your app to untrusted environments, and so you need to be accounting for that in your security program. So the OWASP, Mobile App Security Verification Standard, talks about this sort of external perspective and external threats as, again, something where the user of the app could potentially be the attacker. And these threats include, mobile banking Trojans, as I mentioned earlier, someone that's actually downloading the app, trying to reverse engineer it, trying to inject malicious code, that sort of thing. And you really need to harden your mobile app as it runs in a potentially compromised environment, which might be a rooted or jailbroken device, for example. And so how can this be achieved? Well, app shielding and runtime application self-protection, or RASP, can detect malicious activity and react accordingly. So, for example, if it detects an overlay attack, it can abort operations. If it detects a debugger or some sort of hooking framework trying to interfere with its execution flow, it can stop that from happening, shut down, and again, make it significantly more time and effort intensive to actually reverse engineer the app. So we're running close here on time, and so I want to wrap up quick so we can take some questions from the audience. If you're only going to take away 3 things from this presentation, I hope it will be these. So mobile threats are increasing. A number of reports, as I mentioned, corroborate the fact that there is more mobile malware out there than there has been before, and more fraudsters are turning their attention to the mobile channel itself. Secondly, due care and due diligence really requires that you're going beyond simply counting on Android, iOS, or their official app stores to protect your app. And then finally, it's important to remember that you don't have control over your users' devices. You are deploying your mobile app to untrusted environments and need to take action to protect your app with something like mobile app shielding and runtime protection. And now, just to really quickly give you a pitch before we get to the questions, I just want to mention the fact that OneSpan can help you and your developers make mobile app security more effective and efficient, and secure your mobile apps from both that internal and external perspective. This first category here that I have highlighted is a number of ways that we can help you implement strong authentication mechanisms into your mobile app. The lack of strong authentication is actually number 4 on OWASP's top 10 mobile risks. And with these libraries, we've really taken care of most of the heavy lifting so that your developers can really quickly integrate any number of authentication modalities into your app, including fingerprint, face, behavioral biometrics, and more. The second category here highlights a number of, more specifically, security items you need to take care of from an internal or sort of secure coding perspective. And that includes facilitating secure storage and communications via a secure channel. Again, insecure data storage and insecure communications are the number 2 and 3 top 10 mobile risks on OWASP's list. There's a lot of L's and S's and T's in that phrase, forgive me. In addition, these capabilities are crucial to establishing a secure, high-integrity starting point for authentication. And then finally, talking again about that runtime protection with app shielding, which I just want to say a few more words about. If you're interested in protecting your mobile app during runtime, we've got a really easy proof of concept process that we can use and bring you through, guide you through to really show you the value. Our portal makes it easy to integrate app shielding into your mobile app by simply loading a binary, configuring the security that you're looking for with a number of toggle switches, and then downloading your shielded app. And that happens in just minutes. And again, our team of experts can really guide you or your security team through evaluating that to see and really see the proof of how your app is protected against any number of runtime attacks. And with that, I think we have a few minutes for some questions.
Yes, we do. But before we get to questions, Sam and Will, what a great job, man. Great presentation, informative, on point, up to the second. Great polling questions. Thanks very much, guys. This was a good webinar. We are taking questions, and as I mentioned in the beginning, you can type questions into the question section, and we'll get to them here, as best we can. The first one's a rather long one. Um, from the perspective of repackaged or forged rogue mobile apps and Trojans, is this predominantly isolated to one OS or another, that is Android or iOS, or systemic across, one more common than the other, perhaps?
Yeah, and maybe I'll jump in on that one. So from a standpoint of the attacks themselves, we're seeing them across the board. I think when they're big, you hear about them. So the Xcode Ghost, you see, a couple other kind of mainstream attacks, but you don't necessarily hear about the iOS ones as much as you do about the Android. Android is definitely more simplistic for purposes of demonstration and and attack themselves, but there's still a large number of iOS attacks out there, and certainly the repackaging attacks. There are a number of questions kind of on, is this happening on iOS, and it seems more difficult to happen on iOS. The types of repackaging attacks that are out there for iOS are just as easy to implement when you actually go out to attack those platforms. So when you're out there and lacing your actual iOS application with the ability to download secondary payloads, that's the most common that you see on iOS. But certainly sideloading and the ability to drop an application into iTunes and have that deployed out to your mobile phone, or through the enterprise app store options from Apple. All of those allow for kind of this third party, these rogue application installations.
Okay. Got another question. Maybe it's a comment question, but Martin asked, if you're only showing Android, do we assume that this is not as possible on iPhones?
I think that's another that's pretty much along the same vein. Most of these screens were taken directly from my phone. I'm an Android user, but it is just as susceptible in the iOS world, and we do have some demonstrations and some screens on that too. We just chose to show the latest things that we're experiencing on my phone here. So.
Got it. Here's another one. I apologize. My questions section is a little bit funky here, and I'm trying to read things.
Hey, Alan, can you be sure to ask that? I'd like us to be able to clarify that question about RASP.
Yeah, I'm trying to get to it, and it's
okay.
I got like weirdness going on. Can you see the question clearly, Sam? Would you mind reading that one?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I'm glad that Josh asked it. I can understand RASP solutions in the context of SaaS applications, but how does RASP differ when you're installing it as a thick app to an end user? Does it only work on the back-end processes and services? So Josh, again, you're exactly right. We're talking about app shielding and providing runtime protection of the mobile app, of the binary alone on the device so that it's protected in those untrusted environments. Will, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, so thick app or fat client, again, we're only focusing on the client, so we're not focusing on the back end. I think, the term RASP, is defined, it can be defined in two different ways. You can see it kind of in the cloud world where you're protecting in enterprise security type applications where you're automatically protecting back end services. But reality is what we're talking about here is on the client side. And more, what you see is some definitions as app shielding but also runtime application self-protection is another term that's used in that. So it is very common on the client side, and specifically what we're talking about here is client side only. So we're not talking about server-based or SaaS-based RASP.
Right.
Fantastic. Hey guys, that brings us right up against the edge of the hour here. I'd like to get to more questions, but and they're still coming in. We do have written responses, Josh, I think, as to follow up on RASP. And Sam, if you can grab that question from John, maybe we can get to him offline on it, or from Josh rather. We can get to him offline on it.
Yeah.
But we're going to need, we respect everyone's time. We're going to need to call a wrap on today. Guys, come back again with this stuff. It's a great topic. It's obviously timely and in the forefront of today's security landscape. And you did a great job again. Thanks, both of you. Thanks to OneScope for sponsoring today. I hope everyone out there enjoyed it. OneSpan, excuse me. I hope everyone out there enjoyed it. This is Alan Schimmel for Security Boulevard and DevOps.com. Thanks for joining us on today's webinar. Hope to see you at another one soon. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks again.
Bye-bye.